So the zero is what? So these guys are car guys and they don't have a clue about what straight weight or multi-grade or multi-weight, what all that means when you buy your oil. It seems like no one really understands those numbers on there. Well, I can clearly explain that for you.
Okay.
In my next session. Yeah, putting oil in it's fun.
Yeah.
That's the fun part.
So what else do you have to say about oil?
So, oil. I didn't realize it, but it seems like most people don't really understand what all the 020 and 540 and 1030 and 2050 and straight 30 and all the different numbers on your oil means. And what the number on the oil means is that originally they only had straight weights. So you'd buy a 10 weight or a 20 weight or a 30 weight. No one used 10 weight in the olden days because we weren't worried about fuel economy and we weren't really worried about the oil getting to the top end really quickly. But as time went on, they realized that thick oil in the winter time was very slow to go on the top of the motor and would cause premature wear on all the camshafts and valve train. So not only that, but thick oil, just like my dry sump story, is very hard for the engine to spin through, whereas thinner lubricant is obviously easier and less parasitic loss of horsepower. So they started making multi-grades, and they came up in the beginning with like 1030 was very common, and even 1040 and 2050 were very common multi-grades. And what that means is that what they're trying to tell us is that in the cold, the multi-grade, if it were a 1040, it will act like a 10 weight when it's cold out, and as it warms up it'll get the characteristics of a 40 weight. Now that's a wonderful story and I would love to believe that, but I've had a lot of experience with both warm and cold oil, and though it may lean towards those characteristics a little bit, it doesn't quite act like the numbers suggest it does. And you'll notice with all the newer cars, they've gone 520, they've gone very thin, or even 020. So thin oil, if you have well-machined tolerances, isn't a problem at all. And if you have an oil cooler, which a lot of cars come with a water to oil cooler built in, you control the oil temperature, then the oil doesn't change, it's very stable temperature. It means it only needs to act the way it acts. It doesn't need to change a lot. And because of the fuel economy, everyone's gone to a zero or a very slippery, cold number. So that's what the multi-grade means, whereas a lot of guys with race cars will run a straight weight 30 weight or a straight 40 weight or a straight 50 weight. We'll also never step on the gas cold because we know our oil's thick and it's not going everywhere it needs to go. We wait till the oil temperature comes up, then we step on it. For most drivers, that's never happening. They just get in it, boot it, they don't have any feeling for the poor mechanics inside, and they're basically destroying their motor because they just don't give a flip. I see it every day. Oddly enough, the BMW that I bought recently, after owning it for almost a year, and I'm pretty savvy, I finally realized that the only gauge on the dash, the only analog gauge on the dash besides the fuel, was an oil temperature gauge. And I gained great respect for BMW all of a sudden, because really your coolant temperature is kind of irrelevant unless it's overheating. Your oil temperature is completely relevant to the longevity of your life, of your motor. So if you're nice to it up until you have oil temperature and then you beat on it like I like to, it seems to be little or no damage to the motor. Whereas if you beat on it with cold oil temperature, you cause premature wear. And that's a lesson that, oddly enough, like I said, I don't think anyone realizes the only analog gauge on your dash on a 2013 750 Li is oil temp, which is remarkable. And that's all to do with what happens with oil warm and cold, just like the multi-grades and the straight weights.
So what would you tell our users to prime their engines?
I tell users not to boot on their cars with cold oil temp, because you'll prematurely destroy beautiful equipment unnecessarily. And just have some patience until your water temp's all the way up and your oil temp's starting to come up, and keep your foot out of it until then.